Good afternoon and welcome to this week's reading. Today, I decided to create kind of an experimental exploration play lab around this overarching question of when you begin to experience friction around your existing boundaries, what signs and clues help you determine which boundaries may require your time and attention? Now, boundaries for me have always been a source of frustration, irritation, anger, mostly because I struggle with making them. I struggle with keeping them. I also struggle with knowing which boundaries are healthy and when boundaries need to be changed, updated, released. And so I spend a lot of time just wondering if I'm doing it right, because a lot of times I have a really hard time upholding my own boundaries. And if I struggle to uphold my own boundaries, then how can I expect others to? So for me, the friction I tend to feel is around personal boundaries that then extend out into, the larger areas of my life. So sitting with this, I started to realize that when we begin to feel friction in different areas of our lives, a good place to start is by exploring our boundaries. And it could be an indication that maybe there's a boundary that needs our tending to, or lack of a boundary, even that might want our tending. And so the best way is to kind of start to explore the patterns around it, right? Who are the people we experience the friction with the most often? What happens when we experience friction? Are there consistent experiences that bring on this discomfort and this questioning that we want to explore and get deeper into? And then when we take time to explore the habits and the assumptions and patterns that are built up around certain boundaries or even certain sets of boundaries, we can begin to see where we're pushing more than we used to and where we feel more confined and restricted. Those are usually good indicators that we've hit up against a boundary that is either no longer serving its original purpose or that needs some kind of adjustment to it. Places that exert more energy or that hold more tension may definitely be indications of boundaries that have either outlived their purpose or that need to be updated to reflect who we are now. And that's a key element, right? Because sometimes I think that we forget is that boundaries are created for a specific reason and season within our lives. They're never meant to be a permanent fixture within the landscape of our lives. And one of the reasons I believe this is that we're in constant flux and change. How can we expect a boundary that we created when we were, say, 20 to be the same or to meet the same need as when we're 30 or when we're 50? The core of the boundary, right? The reason we set that boundary, it might still be relevant. It might still be something that we can update, change, accommodate for, modify for, and just build new boundaries over and over again. But this is why when we feel a friction around our boundaries, it might be a really good indication that we've arrived at a growth point and that this discomfort is more a sign that we're ready to shed something. And remember, this something could be an entire boundary, or it could be parts that no longer fit, or it could be a habit that we have taken on that really has brought that boundary out of sync with what's going on in our lives. And so these are really important places for us to jump in and explore and kind of see what's going on there. So the purpose for this week's reading is to open up space where we can examine the role of the boundaries that we are currently living in. And that's the thing with boundaries, right? Is no matter how open, no matter how much we want them to be opening ourselves up, which they do, they still put us in something, right? They still confine us in some kind of container. So if I say I have a boundary around abuse, then yes, it is good, it is healthy, it is wonderful, but it still keeps us in a container that protects us, right? And so we're going to look at that. And so what I'm going to start to shuffle into the cards right now is the question, what boundaries and structures in our lives are asking to be explored? So what boundaries and structures in our lives are asking to be explored? Shuffled up nicely. bonus one today. One, two, three, four, five. All right. Our first question asks, what part of your existing architecture is becoming visible? So when we're looking at, the friction or the discomfort that we're feeling right now, it's because it's bringing a certain part of our landscape of the architecture that we've built. It's making it visible so we can actually enter it in a more active kind of, I want to say like debugging kind of way. And it's interesting that here we are having a whole conversation around boundaries. And the very first card that we come up is the Seven of Wands, which means really right now, there's a lot of things around boundaries for everyone. I think it's being asked to look at boundaries that were set 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even last year are starting to crumble. And part of it is because the systems that we live in, the systems that we are experiencing, they're crumbling. And so the boundaries that we have set, they're being asked to be explored, to be looked at, to be experienced on a different level, on a different perspective, right? What is it that has you separated out from everything down here that you feel is a threat against you, that you feel is coming to take something else away from you? So when we look at the existing architect that is becoming visible, the thing that we're really being asked to look at is look at the framework, look at the networking systems that you have created and the boundaries that you have around them, because something is being asked to be changed, to be explored, to be looked at. And it's very important for us to be able to hold that space and to know, why are we creating these boundaries? What is the purpose of these boundaries? Are the boundaries meant to keep someone out? Are the boundaries meant to keep someone in? These boundaries, when you look at it from the perspective of this Seven of Wands, it is isolating one person, one thought, one area from everything else. And so it's asking, maybe what it's asking is, what boundaries have cut you off from the changing world, from the changing relationships, from your evolving self? And it's really time to look at the architecture that has come, that has basically almost severed you from the life that you think you're living, that you want to live, and to really start to look at, how have my boundaries isolated me? So I think that's definitely, when you're looking at a spread and the first card that comes up holds the theme of that spread, I think we're really kind of tapping into something that is being asked to be explored and looked at right now. Our next question asks, what feels too solid and confining? And coming out of the Seven of Wands, right? Like it's really interesting to see what will be coming out from here. And here we have the Page of Cups. So the Page of Cups up in the northern position, which is Earth, can add a little bit of muddiness to it. And I'm thinking, when you look at the idea of muddiness with the question about what feels too solid and confining, I'm feeling that what's coming out now is maybe it's less about too solid and more about lack of solidity, right? If you have ever had the experience of walking through mud and getting stuck and losing your boots or falling down and really struggling and having to have somebody come and help you get up and get you unstuck, and the suction, right, of that mud that just keeps you and refuses to let you go, that's kind of what we're being asked to lean into. So where do we have invitations to connect with other people? Where do we have invitations that our intuition is pulling us out and saying, this is a really good time for us to get creative, to get connected, but yet that sucking stickiness of the mud is holding us back. There's a resistance, there's a physical resistance where when the invitation comes in and we go, oh, this is a really good idea, our body just contracts and we just feel this tightening of, no, 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 this is unsafe. We have to stay here. And we, in the introduction, I was talking about like the places where we're putting a lot of effort in, where we're putting way more work in. This is one of those things. An example would be you have a friend that calls you up and say, hey, let's go for coffee. And all of a sudden you just contract down. And you think, oh, going out for coffee, it's too much money, it's too much of a hassle, it's too far to go, it's right. And we just keep putting excuses and excuses on top of it. And maybe it's tying into these old boundaries around I can only be part of groups. I can only be part of networks. I can only be part of friendships. I can only be in relationship with anything outside of myself as long as it abides by what the boundaries are that I've set, right? If I asked you out and you said no, then you asked me out, I'm going to say no because you broke the boundary of what it was, right? And it's one of those things where we're also dealing with cups, right? So we're dealing with the emotions. And I think one of the things that the page is asking us to explore is what is feeding the mud, right? What is it? What past hurt, what past upset, what past fear and worry is feeding the water, the emotion into that mud and making it really hard for us to get out, to step out, right? Because even when you step out of mud, you're still dirty, right? You still feel that mud clinging onto you. And as it dries, right? Again, if you've ever had the experience of putting your hand in mud, or I have had the experience of being completely covered in mud. And as soon as it starts to dry, it gets really difficult to move. If it's on your clothes become very stiff. If it's on your skin, you can hear it crack and you can see how it cracks at the joints, and then it becomes kind of uncomfortable and you just want to wash it off. And so the invitation might also be, it's time to wash off. So instead of sitting with the mud and feeling the dirt and feeling the constriction and feeling the stuckness, we're inviting you to wash off the dirt, the debris, the decay of those boundaries that are still keeping you isolated from other people. Then we move into how are you experiencing the friction? And after having the mud analogy, it'll be interesting to see the energetics of the friction that we're feeling with these boundaries. And here we have death. And this, I think, is, first of all, it's our middle card. So, and it's the first major arcana that we've had of this spread. So this is a pivotal moment of the energetics. And I think what we're looking at here is, so whenever I think of death, I think of the butterfly or the caterpillar that goes into a cocoon. And that caterpillar has enough faith and has enough trust to allow itself in its process to be turned into goo, right? Like the caterpillar body completely melts down into this, to me, it's like a preternatural kind of goo. And from that goo, it gets reconstituted as the butterfly. And then the butterfly has to have the confidence and follow its instincts to break out of the cocoon. Now, a lot of times people are like, okay, I'm breaking out of the cocoon and I'm going to go off. The thing is if you've ever watched butterflies come out of cocoons, what they will do is they will slowly unfurl their wings. They will stay connected to the side of the cocoon and they will unfurl their wings, and slowly they will just kind of open and close their wings. Open and close their wings very, very slowly. They're not going to come out and go like this, right? But basically what they're doing is they're allowing their wings to dry because they still come out wet. And as they allow their wings to dry, that drying, right, like the goo that is still on their wings, as it dries, it acts as a lacquer that really strengthens and solidifies their wings. And only once their wings have been completely dried and, for lack of a better word, because we're in the fire area, cured, right? Like when you put clay in the kiln and it gets cured, it hardens. And it's able at that point to support and take the caterpillar off. And so when we're looking at what we just came out of with all that mud, we're being asked, now is the time to wash yourself clean. It's a process. It takes time, because the first thing that it takes is the confidence and the faith and the courage to get into the water, to get into the cleansing process to wash away all the old that has been gathered up and gathered around, so that once you've been washed, you can step away from the mud puddle that's left behind, and you can stand and allow yourself to air dry. You can allow yourself to feel the pieces click back into place, to get that alignment, to find that inner peace, that you're ready to take forward. And also to really understand what has changed. Because obviously, if there's boundaries that are now isolating you, something has changed. Those boundaries, when they were first placed, they served a role, they had a purpose. And now it's important for us to understand, once we wash away all the mud and all the grime and right the habits and the routines and the stories, once we wash all of the old ones away and we allow everything to settle, we can sit here with death and understand, how have we changed? Because this is not a death that happens fast. This is not a transformation that happens like instantly. This is something that has been occurring over a long period of time. And like the caterpillar, it takes a long time for the caterpillar to morph into the butterfly. But it also takes just as much time for the butterfly to come out of the cocoon and allow itself to pause and to be present as its wings really start to strengthen to be able to carry it. And that's what, we're kind of at. It's the experience of the change is what's causing the friction, because now we're in a place where there's dissonance. There's something in our lives right now that is not fitting the way we expect it to, or the way it has. And this can just be that situation has changed just enough that whatever that boundary is holding, whatever that piece is of the architect, it just doesn't fit anymore. And if you think about it, so where I live, we get frost in wintertime. And every time the frost comes in, it shifts the house. And then it'll shift it back in the spring, right? So those little minute shifts, they're not anything you can even see with the naked eye, but they do happen. They can cause cracks in the foundation. They can cause, I had to replace a door because the way the house shifted eventually after so many years, the door wouldn't shut properly. And so the frame was skewed. And these are the things that we're being asked to look into. They're not big, they're not dramatic, they're not life altering in the sense that we're going to die if we don't deal with them right now. What they are is, I'm going to go back to a reading I did several months ago. They're the pebble in the shoe. And it's asking you, it got there somehow. So now you have to decide if you're going to leave it there or if you're going to fix it. And that's what the boundaries are meant to be, right? The boundary that we might need to look at setting is, how much discomfort do I allow myself to have before I take action, right? And if you've allowed yourself to be so regimented in how you holding your boundaries, you're going to be isolating yourself, because you might be, oh, every time I go here, I have this, so I'm not going to go there anymore, right? Instead of trying to see, well, what is it about here, or what is it about this person, you just go, I'm just going to cut them off because my boundary says no, right? And that's what we're being asked really to kind of lean into. So that brings us to, I think, the most interesting question of this spread. Who sits at the center of the boundary? And when I was writing this up, my idea of the who is you, right? Which version of you is sitting at the center of this boundary, is sitting at the center of this discomfort? And it'll be interesting to see, because is this the you that made the original boundary? Is this the you that is changing and evolving? Or is this a version of you that's lost and has no idea what to do? But let's see who is sitting at the center of the boundary. And here we have the Knight of Wands. And I think that this is really interesting because you've got fire now in a water position, because we're in the West. And so there's a lot of, when you put water on fire, you get steam. And I think there's like different ways of looking at this. There's that the sauna, right, where you pour the water on the hot rocks and you get that nice steam and it heats up. Or there's times when you get fog and you get mist, right? Because if you have a colder climate and it's hot, right? So for instance, when we have a warm day in the winter, we get a lot of fog that kind of comes up. And so there's a lot of imagery around water and fire that can contribute to this foggy, unable to kind of see. And so to me, it's really kind of indicating that the who that's sitting in the middle of this uncertainty, of this boundary that's looking for exploration, is the one that wants to move forward and is unable to see, because the water keeps putting the spark out and saying no, right? Water, like the water element, is very emotional based. It's very instinctual and intuitive, in the sense of something's going to happen, we don't know what it is, so we're going to wait and see, and we have to really understand what's going on, because we want to be safe. We don't want to hurt people. We don't want to hurt others. And especially if we're looking at boundaries that we've been talking about isolating us, oh, we have to be careful what we do because it might hurt other people. And so we have to make sure that we keep ourselves away, that we are understanding what's going on, and that we're looking at everything that's going on. And then you have a knight, right? Knights are unable to sit still. They have no capacity to be idle, right? They are meant to move. And we're looking at energetics because we're in the wands. And there's energetics that are at play here, and that are basically trying to beat their heads against a wall in order to get some kind of movement. And in the West, the energy of the West is going, we have to be safe. We have to keep everyone safe. And so I am unable to rush off and start this epic grand adventure, or start this huge big battle, because it's going to cause someone else harm. It's going to cause someone else to get upset, to be hurt. And I'm pulling myself away from that. That is against the boundaries that I've set. And so because of it, I'm going to just sit here. And then that energy just kind of starts to swirl. And when you get enough of it swirling, you're going to cause some kind of tempest. And you might already feel it whenever this boundary comes up, where you're feeling sick to your stomach, where the anxiety is spiking, where you start to really question yourself, and you start to hear a lot of those older stories that maybe you've worked through that are coming back, and you're going, why does this keep coming back? Because it's pointing back to a boundary that needs to be explored, that needs to be either released, rewritten. Something is being asked to have your attention to it and to find out what's going on. And the night will never stop until it's allowed to use up its energy and move forward. And it'll be interesting to see what this friction around this boundary from the night is going to reveal in the final question, which is, what is the friction revealing? And here we have, again, so we've had 3 fire cards come up. So here's the Page of Wands in the East. Now, this is really interesting because now we have an air and a fire, which can be very healthy or very unhealthy, in the sense, if you put too much air into a fire, it can just basically explode. And if you're familiar with things like backdraft, right? So a lot of times when firefighters go into buildings, they have to be very careful what doors they open, because if they open a door to a room that has a fire that's fairly contained oxygen wise, and they open the door and they feed that fire with oxygen, it explodes. And that's what this is saying, right? So if you, with the Knight of Wands, who is really looking to get that energy moving, is really like pushing against every possible weakness, crack, in order to find a way for their energy to explode outwards. When the Page comes in with all the air and the ability to really kind of get things moving, you have to be careful, because it could explode in ways that you really are unprepared to handle. And so the Page of Wands comes in and says, there's a way that we can do this. We can explore this. We can be curious about it. We can be adventurous about it. And we can be safe about it, because the Page wants to come in and wants to play and wants to experiment and wants to, again, very, very moving. We have a lot of moving energy here, right? Even though the Seven of Wands is isolating us in this context, it is still moving, because you're still at a defensive stance. You still have the energy to be able to fight and to be able to move forward. And then we have the Knight, who is just energy in motion. And now we have the Page that's coming in and saying, hey, you are aware now of the Knight. You're aware that there's some kind of energy disturbance around these boundaries that needs to be dealt with. So let's look at this from a different perspective. Let's explore, let's play in a safe way to avoid any kind of angry outburst, any kind of outburst that is going to be explosive. And, it's that idea of, take action now before you say something or do something that you can't undo. And we did have an extra card that came out at the beginning when I was shuffling. And this one adds a little bit of interesting ideas into it, because here we have the Six of Swords, and the Six of Swords again is a conversation that we're being asked to have around where are you ready to move away from, right? It's almost like the death cards kind of pointing towards this, because even though she's moving away, there's these swords that are all around, which means you're going to move away, but you still need to move away in a way that's calculated, that's careful, to avoid any sudden upset, any sudden disruption, any danger. And when you have that Knight of Wands who's really just kind of spinning his wheels and looking to get out, plus the page that's going to bring a lot of that fire into an air place that can then lead to a lot of conflict, a lot of communication problems, you have this kind of message of warning to say it is time to move on. It is time to really think about what it is that you're doing, understand where you're feeling a lot of conflict, where you're feeling a lot of discomfort, where you're feeling a lot of friction, and make a plan. Make a plan that is clear, that is understood, and that helps you to avoid any of the pitfalls that all of the cards that have been revealed today can lead you to, right? Because there's always the pitfall of continuing to be stubborn and just sitting there and holding on to these boundaries that just continuously isolate you from other people. There's the pitfall, right, of just adding more and more water to this and getting stuck deeper and deeper into the mud, and allowing that then to feed the stories of, well, no matter what I do, it's not going to change, so I might as well just stay there. It helps us to avoid moving through this transition at lightning speed and really slowing down during every process, so that you can see which patterns are involved in this, which people, which spaces are involved in this, and start to kind of, really tie into that Six of Swords of, let's make a plan on how we can best strengthen our wings so that when we fly away, we are strong. It helps us to understand why we're getting these bouts of anger, why we're getting these bouts of frustration, why in certain areas and situations we feel that we're not who we are, because something keeps getting brought up that will impact us. And it might be like that, right? Like we might just suddenly shift and we're in a different mood, we're in a different mindset. But as long as we remain curious, as long as we're open to explore and we're careful about it, right? We're careful in what we're doing, then we'll be able to really pinpoint, first of all, the boundary that is asking for our attention. And then second of all, what is the boundary asking for? Because the thing to remember is that just because a boundary might be asking for our attention, it is no indication at all that it is asking for us to take it down, to destroy it, to move on from it. Sometimes it might just be asking for us to pay attention to it so that we can remember maybe we set that boundary in the first place. Because if we get too complacent, then it's easy enough for us to forget the things that we had put in place that are there to support us. So I hope that you enjoyed this reading and that you got something out of it. In the meantime, take care, and I will see you around the webs.